Welcome to KSTP.com and 1500ESPN.com. He is Tom Pelissero from 1500 ESPN. Tom, welcome.
Thank you.
This is the first time we've actually done this. Normally you're big time with
Normally you're working
Joe
behind
Schmidt.
The camera,
Yes.
and I'm out here. I'm glad we can finally be
That's
equals here.
Yep. Perfect. I'm honored to be here with you. All right, so you can ask
I'm
Tom
more honored to
anything-
be with you, but yeah.
Right,
anyway.
right. You can ask Tom anything you want about sports. We can talk about Vikings, Twins, whatever you want. You're preparing to go to Florida.
Preparing to go to Fort Myers in about 2 weeks here, which
Wow.
just seems bizarre.
Tough job.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
No.
But when you walk in through the outside and you got 20 degrees out there and thinking about the fact that we're going to be watching baseball in 2 weeks here, not a bad thought. Not a bad one to get you through.
All right, last night the president gave his State of the Union address for the Vikings.
Well, I mean, at this point, they clearly have a lot of things that they've got to be looking at. I've been doing the review stories over the past couple of days at 1500ESPN.com, breaking it down player by player. And it's interesting when you go back through and you look at every single guy on the team game by game, how it wasn't necessarily huge drops for everybody, but little things, just guys falling off. The fact that Jared Allen just fell off enough to make a difference. I think that, other guys on both sides of the ball really just fell off that little bit, and that could be the huge difference, not just with, your players like Mediu Williams and Bernard Berrien who fell off the map and probably won't be back, but also players who are still very serviceable starters just aren't quite at that same level. So right now the coaching staff is down and the scouting staff down at the Senior Bowl, Mobile, Alabama, looking at a lot of different guys. Sounds like they've been checking out some quarterbacks down there. They've got to set the plan. And of course, this is such an uncertain offseason. We really have no idea how things are going to shake out and on what timeline.
Now, is Berrien's contract up, or is he just
Berrien's
gonna be cut?
He's due $4 million next year.
Okay.
And he's a vertical speed threat receiver who averages 9 yards a catch. You're not going to pay him $4 million. I find that extremely hard to believe. I thought it was very strange when on exit day, on move-out day, and Berrien was asked by a group of reporters, do you think you're going to be back? He said, well, definitely. Just had a great meeting with Leslie Frazier. Now, on some level, you always take that stuff with a grain of salt because no one's ever going to say, no, I think I'm getting cut. But it was interesting that he was that confident about it. I don't know exactly what he heard, but at this stage, talking to scouts around the NFL, it's not just that Berrien looks like he can't play anymore. It looks like he doesn't want to play. It just looks like he's more concerned about not getting hit, not getting himself hurt than he is about actually trying to make plays.
I wonder if he's so confident because he knows who else do the Vikings have.
It's part of it, but I mean, at this point, Berrien's not a starting caliber receiver, and really, I would argue that he's not even really a serviceable number 3 at this point. At the beginning of the season, when I was, talking to people who would know this stuff, I was told that he's basically a borderline 2, maybe a 3 receiver in the NFL. At this stage, after a second straight season where his yards per catch dropped significantly, Berrien does one thing, and that's run the length of the field. He needs guys like Sidney Rice taking some of the pressure, drawing safeties toward the middle, because all he can do is really run in a straight line, run go routes. Berrien's not going to hurt you underneath. He's not going to hurt you in the intermediate game. The problem is, when you can't run anymore, and that happens to everybody. No matter how good you are, everybody hits that age where suddenly you've lost that step. For Berrien, that's his entire game, and it's going to be really tough for him to be a serviceable receiver. I think he could still be a number 3 or number 4 for a guy, but you can't pay him $4 million.
Sure. By the way, if you have a question, just type it in right there. We can see it, and we'll ask Tom the question, whatever you like. Somebody likes your hair. That is Steve that likes your hair.
I need a haircut badly, actually.
Really?
It's way too long.
It all kind of looks the same every time I see it. It's
No,
just perfectly messy.
There was a mistake made last time. Never mind. We don't need to. We don't need
wanna
to
go into
dress
your hair.
down my barber. Yeah.
Just under a barber. All right. What is the Vikings' biggest need? I mean, what do they absolutely have to address? Quarterback.
It starts at the quarterback position, without a doubt, because they don't have an answer. I know the people were enamored of Joe Webb based on his performance against Philadelphia. The Vikings don't believe that Joe Webb is going to be in a position where he's ready to compete for a starting job next year, just because you have so far to go from what he was asked to do at UAB, from running a shotgun, spread offense, no huddle, to huddling up, running whatever the scheme ends up being. And they also want to get Webb on the field. They don't know that they want him out there 70 snaps a game, but a guy who's that freakishly talented, you look at all of his measurables, the things he's able to do in space, the way he's able to scramble, they want to be able to use him in sort of a Cordell Stewart type of role, or Antoine Randall, maybe run some wildcat, put him out at receiver some. The way those guys were used early in their careers, where you saw them play in different positions, that's probably more the fit for Webb, but they also still want to develop him in 2-3 years down the line. Who knows, maybe he can play quarterback.
Nate wants to know thoughts on Vince Young. Is it really possible that he would be a Viking or could become a Viking?
anything's possible. The issues with Vince Young, I think that the number one thing is the Vikings have to be really careful with bringing in a guy who has a history of off-the-field concerns, character concerns, issues with really both on and off the field. You have a guy who, when he gets booed, he throws his pads into the stands. Or when he gets booed, he disappears in his car with a gun and the police are out searching for him all night. Or he's photographed in clubs punching people. Or he's photographed in clubs blacked out drunk drinking tequila from a bottle. These are all things that Vince Young has had happen to him. And it's just, it would be one thing if this were your receiver, if this were a star player on defense, but when it's your quarterback, your franchise guy, the face of the organization, and the guy that people really have to rally around as a team. There's a reason it's the most important position. You can't have a guy who's that much of a character liability, and that's why I think the Vikings have to tread really lightly, especially since they went down that road last year with Randy Moss. That blew up in their faces in a huge way, on top of the fact that Vince Young is due, I believe, a $4.25 million bonus in March on top of a base salary that's somewhere around the high sevens to the high eights in millions of dollars. So $12-13 million to bring in Vince Young next year on top of giving up a pick for him. I don't buy that, but I also think that with Jeff Fisher staying in Tennessee, he's not going to be able to coexist with Vince Young. The Titans are going to have to move him. If Vince Young gets cut, now you're talking about maybe being able to make a lower money investment, bring in a guy for 1 year while you develop another quarterback. I don't think Young's a guy you commit to from a franchise perspective at all, but as a 1 year stopgap, he's better than most options out there.
Lots of Vikings questions so far. Have Pat Williams, Jimmy Kennedy, and Ray Edwards played their last games for the Vikings?
Pat Williams, I would guess yes.
Wasn't he contemplating retirement?
He was contemplating
last year.
He was contemplating retirement, but he said late this year that he intends to play at least one more season. He'd like to play till he's 40. He's 38 now. He had another elbow procedure recently, so that's 2 straight off seasons that he's had surgery there. His snap count dropped. I think he had 42 tackles, which is his lowest since 1998. Really, he wasn't as involved as he's been. He's getting turned around a little bit more. With Pat Williams, what you're asking him to do is be an anchor in there, take on double teams, just be able to stand up and take up space, take up blockers so your linebackers can make plays. Too often last year you saw Pat Williams getting turned around, getting knocked back a little bit, ending up getting washed out of the play. Not a ton. He's still serviceable. He's still better than average in that sort of 20, 30, 40 snap a game run-stopping role, but he's not what he once was. Jimmy Kennedy is on the books for $2.5 million next season. Based on his production last year, I would think that it's awfully tough to justify paying him that much money next year. And Ray Edwards, the thing is, he was their best defensive lineman this year. In my opinion, he was probably on about par with Kevin Williams. He played better than Jared Allen on the other side. Yeah, you have some consistency issues with Ray Edwards. You have the fact that he's prone to making just kind of mental errors, hitting quarterbacks, taking cheap shots. He racked up $32,500 in fines this year. And also, they just have concerns. He's a guy you're concerned about paying, but somebody's going to pay him. I don't think it's going to be the Vikings.
Well, he's a little bit of a wild card. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah.
That whole thing where didn't he go after Chris Cook on the sideline?
He had the blow up with Cook during the Green Bay game. Although, in the end, it's not the worst thing that could happen. You want to see guys at least care. They weren't just taking it, lying down. But you don't want to see confrontations on the sideline. You're right. You don't know what you're necessarily going to get with Ray Edwards. You worry with a guy like that about what happens when he gets a bunch of money. He's going to get 10, 15 million guaranteed from somebody. He is that good. I've talked to scouts who would rank him as a top 5 left end in the league at this stage of his career. So somebody's going to pay him. But when you look at the Vikings offseason priorities in terms of veteran players, number one thing is restructure Adrian Peterson's deal, because he's not going to play out the final year of his deal without a contract extension. I just don't buy it. There's too much liability, especially coming into a new offensive scheme where if his production were to take a hit, that could impact his value. And then you also have Chad Greenway and Sidney Rice, who I think rank higher as priorities than Ray Edwards. They have options with the left end position. You could re-sign Brian Robinson to become significantly cheaper and has been okay in spot duty. And you also have Everson Griffin, who I think is a rising player and is going to get a look.
Although I kind of think that Rice thing was kind of smelled a little funny. Don't you think how he waited to have surgery until, I don't know. It just was kind of weird. I mean, I think
it was a strange situation because you don't get a whole lot of times in the NFL where 7 months after surgery, a guy has, or 7 months after an injury, the guy has surgery. Yeah. You just don't see that. Most players, the way that the NFL works, over the 2 days after the season ends, everybody comes through, they all take their exit physical. If you've got something wrong, you go and have surgery the next week.
Was he trying to get that contract?
I don't think that his contract situation helped. Knowing that Drew Rosenhaus is his agent, I'm sure that Drew was in his ear saying, listen, don't come back a second too soon. Don't push it because you don't want to re-injure yourself and really harpoon your value. I don't think that he was holding out for a contract. I think that he had a legitimate injury, that there were two options to taking care of it. They either could
but
treat it with rest.
Do you think he avoided the surgery because he was hoping, hey, I can get more money if I don't have surgery? Because
I think it had a lot more to do with the fact that I think that he really thought he could treat it with rest, but they got to a point where he didn't feel like he was 100%, and so without a new deal in hand, he didn't want to come back out, re-injure it, and put himself in a really tough position. That also speaks to the timeline of when he came back. He was eligible to come back much before he did. He didn't return until, I think, that Green Bay game on November 24th. And by the time he actually got in the flow 2 weeks later, he had that huge game against, I think it was Buffalo at the Metrodome, where he made several huge plays down the field. He just wasn't going to come back too soon, not look like the same Sidney Rice. He'd already done that in 2008. He had a knee injury, wasn't himself. He'd already gone through that experience. He wasn't going to play at less than 100%, knowing that the only tape teams had on him up until that point was the 2009 tape, which was very good.
Andy wants to know, what's our offensive line going to look like next year?
That is a good question from Andy. I think that Bryant McKinney is back at left tackle. He remains an above-average guy. They don't have the long-term option. Unless you're talking about spending your top draft pick on a player to take over that position, it's going to be tough to find a new left tackle in the draft. I think they have other needs. At left guard, Steve Hutchinson, I think they at least have to broach the subject of having him take a pay cut. He's due almost $7 million next year, which for a guard who's no longer at an elite status, Hutchinson is declining. 2 years in a row now, he's been hampered by injuries late in the season. He doesn't bend as well. He doesn't have that same flexibility, which is natural at age 33, but you're not able to get under guys in the run game. You'd see times this year where you just kind of set a thin block, somebody would throw him. You didn't see that happen to Hutchinson in his prime. So I think that he could be, or he most likely is back, but I think the Vikings at least have to broach the subject of having him take less money. John Sullivan at center. Chris DeGear, I think, is probably the favorite right now at right guard, just because Anthony Herrera is going to be coming off an ACL, and at his age, and with the progress DeGear showed, I think that DeGear is probably a better option there. Phil Lodeholt's back at right tackle. He's got to be able to get back to developing at the rate that they want him to, because I think he maybe took a step back this year.
What other veterans do you see leaving the team because the Vikings won't either pay them or because they can't afford them?
Well, I mean, there's a list of, I think, 22 guys who are from the 53-man roster, injured reserve last year, who are no longer under contract with the team. You got guys like Ben Lieber, Ben Lieber still performed at a high level. For the number of snaps he played and the number of impact plays he made, he was part of 4 turnovers, and he played, I think, about half the defensive snaps. He was around the ball, still good in pass coverage. He's 32, but isn't a guy who's markedly declining at this point. I think, though, based on his role at this point, I think that somebody else will probably bring him in for a little more money than the Vikings are willing to pay, but that also could come down to whether or not they feel they can re-sign Chad Greenway, because losing both those guys would put them in a really tough position. In terms of some of the other guys, there's a lot of those marginal sorts of players like Greg Lewis, Hank Baskett, Brian Robinson potentially could be gone. Lito Shepard, Frank Walker, those guys are just basically guys. They're serviceable, veteran, stopgap sort of players. You're going to see a lot of those guys who are going to be gone because they've got to be able to focus on the few players that they really need to resign. The other guys, if they come back, they come back. But other than that, you have to rebuild your roster from the bottom up.
Thoughts on the Vikings taking offensive tackle first round?
It's certainly a possibility because, again, you need to be able to develop a long-term plan for Bryant McKinney at left tackle. Left tackle along with quarterback are your core positions on your team because they're the hardest to fill from the physical aspect, also from the mental aspect when you're talking about quarterback. But with the left tackle, you need a really premier athlete. You need a guy who's got the long enough arms to keep defensive linemen from getting their hands on you. You need really quick feet because, again, you're facing one of your opponent's best players snap in and snap out over there. At some point, they have to do that. I look at it, I would put offensive line along with the defensive backfield and quarterback as being the top needs on the team. So, yeah, I could see them going that direction. Is it the number one need, though? No, and I think that until we know what they're going to do at the quarterback position, it's tough to project what other directions they might go in the draft.
What are some potential free agent targets you see the Vikings going after?
It's really hard to say, honestly, because at this stage, we don't know if 4 years is enough to get you to unrestricted free agency, if it's going to be 5, if it could even be 6, which I doubt. But because of the uncertain status of the labor situation, we don't know what the next collective bargaining agreement is going to dictate in terms of who can hit the open market. It's really too soon to say. We don't know if there's going to be a franchise tag either, and that's something that's probably going to be used by a lot of teams, even more than usual this year if there is a tag, because fewer teams sign their marquee potential free agents to multi-year deals, not knowing what the situation is going to be and not wanting to commit big upfront money heading into a lockout.
I don't mean to put you on the spot, but do you know how many
No, that's what
players were on injured reserve for the Packers this year? Wasn't it some
15, I believe.
15. So they got pretty good depth.
Oh,
obviously,
without a doubt, yeah.
Do you see some players coming out of Green Bay simply because they've shown that it's either some rookies that can play that they replaced?
Yeah,
them
I
and
think.
say, oh, okay, you know.
I think you could definitely look at that. I think they have a glut at this point at linebacker, for one thing, with the Packers. You have Nick Barnett, who's been out for most of this year. You have Brandon Chiller, who they re-signed pretty recently. They also committed money to Desmond Bishop this year. A.J. Hawk, I think, is in the last year of his deal, or at least the last non-voidable year of his deal, so potentially he could be on his way out there. They've rotated a whole bunch of guys through at the outside linebacker position. Is there room for a guy like Brady Papinga? Who knows? But you're right, there have been some guys who have come in and shown things. That being said, Ryan Grant's going to be back with the Packers next year. Jermichael Finley's going to be back in a big role with the Packers next year. Mm-hmm. I don't think that that's necessarily going to cause them to go, oh, these guys are better than the guys we have. If anything, it's just a credit to Mike McCarthy for being able to get the most out of those guys and his coaching staff, and Ted Thompson for accumulating the depth, because they weren't plugging holes from the outside. They weren't going out and signing the eighth-year veteran who's on the street and hasn't necessarily been in a program. They were taking their rookies and their untested guys and going, all right, here's your chance.
And the rookies have done well.
Yeah, when you got guys, you got Eric Walden and Frank Zombo rotating through there and playing significant snaps. It's unbelievable that they're in the position they are.
Yeah. Which, if I'm Ted Thompson, I'm going, okay, so now I look at my overall budget and go, okay, well, maybe this guy we could do. And we have a very good replacement for him.
Yeah, and that's always been Ted Thompson's philosophy. He's probably more than any other executive in the NFL. He looks to the future at all times. That's why, and it's all unemotional. It is the most calm, measured decisions. You know, having talked with him one-on-one on a number of occasions and also having just looked at his philosophy over the years, he's a guy who takes emotion out of everything, sometimes to his detriment. I think that you look at the way that the Brett Favre situation was handled in 2008. Mm-hmm. That was a situation where Ted Thompson really underestimated the reaction of fans, and the fact that making a cold, calculated football decision that you're moving forward with the younger player in Aaron Rodgers who you want to play was just part of the story, and the fact that people were really going to, you know, there was going to be significant backlash about it. In the end, you look at how the Packers are playing this year, and you say it was absolutely right, the right move. But in the short term, people wanted to run Ted Thompson out of town. For years, they wanted to.
Yeah. What is the Packers being in the Super Bowl, potentially being Super Bowl champions, do for the Favre fan relationship? Does it help the fans? Even though Favre played this year for the division rival, the Vikings, does it help the fans go, yeah, okay, come back in, Brett?
I think a lot of Packers fans are happy that in the end the Packers were able to stick it back to Favre as much as Favre stuck it to the Packers last season. I don't think that there's really a ton of people who are eager to get him back into the fold. Let's be honest, Aaron Rodgers is still the quarterback of that team and will be for a long time. As much as the relationship between Rodgers and Favre improved over Rodgers' time there, from being really frosty in 2005 when he was drafted to, by 2007, Rodgers having dinner with Brett and Deanna on a regular basis, like once a week, and they had kind of gotten closer together. The fact that when Aaron Rodgers tried to reach out to Brett Favre after his retirement in 2008, never got a call back. From that point on, their relationship has been, they really don't have a relationship. And so I think that bringing back Favre in any sort of capacity in terms of having relations with the team, being a part of, pregame coin tosses and that sort of stuff, it's a dicey situation because I don't think Aaron Rodgers wants him there. I don't think Mike McCarthy necessarily would be eager. He would never say it, but I don't think he's eager to have him back there. Ted Thompson, too. As much as someday he's going to come back in the fold, they're going to retire his jersey and all that, I think we're still several years away from that happening.
So you think it's a couple of years before Favre is seen again? I mean, does he sign
Absolutely,
does he sign that one-day contract to retire as a Packer?
Not for at least a couple of years, because we still don't know. In the end, we don't know if Favre is
going to...
You
really think he could come back next year?
Yeah, I don't think it's likely. I'd put a 99% chance that he doesn't. But again, it's Brett Favre. And when you get to a situation, if you're a team that runs the West Coast offense next year, and you're competing for a playoff berth, and you get 6 weeks into the year and your quarterback gets injured, who is your first phone call? If it's Brett Favre or Patrick Ramsey, who are you calling? I'm calling Brett Favre. I don't care how broken down he is. I don't care how much he said that he's never playing again. And maybe he really would say no. It would take the right coach, the right system, the right situation. But would I rule it out? It's Brett Favre. How can you?
That's true. Switching to Twins, will the Twins look at trading Delman Young?
I think that that's something they could look at potentially down the line, simply because he's going to go to arbitration this year if they aren't able to work out a deal here in the coming days. I think that you look at the amount of money he's going to make and the fact that he's another guy, like we were talking about with Ray Edwards. Delman Young, if you're the Twins or any major league team, I think is a guy you would worry about paying. A guy you would worry about, is his performance going to suffer the moment he gets that big money deal? Right now, Delman Young has a lot of motivation. He's got a lot of people to prove wrong. He's got a lot of money to earn. But you look at some of his weight problems in the past, some of his inconsistencies, some of the tendencies he's shown going all the way back to his minor league career. I would be concerned about giving him a long-term deal. You may get to a situation, depending how a guy like Jason Kubel fares this year, where Kubel was hitting so poorly last year, you really couldn't even think about getting rid of another bat in the outfield. You needed to keep all the offense you could. But you get into a situation this year, who's going to be one of your main trading chips if you re-sign Delman Young for 1 year? I would think he'd be out there, again, depending what they think of some of the guys in the minor league system. How close is Ben Revere if they keep him? Although I think that he's a guy who they would definitely move at some point. Aaron Hicks, how close is he? They've got to be able to determine all of that.
All right, Tom, you are going to Florida, Fort Myers spring training on February or in March?
In February, and I'll also be actually going back in March, and then Phil Mackey will be spending about 5 weeks down there too.
Tough job, you guys.
Hey,
really, really tough.
We'll be working hard.
Yeah,
working hard during the day, having some fun at night. I'm sure.
At night, steaks,
you never
on
know.
the beach, whatever. You know, have fun.
We can only get so much on the expense report around here. Let's be honest.
All right, you can catch your work anytime by going to 1500ESPN.com.
That's correct.
All right, Tom Pelissero. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.